The transport ship arrived at Calith Prime on a Tuesday morning, its hull gleaming silver against the pale blue sky of the neutral moon. Inside the ship, beings from dozens of different worlds prepared to disembark at the most famous military academy in the galaxy. Kang Do-hyun pressed his face against the small window, watching as the massive structures of Vorthak Military Academy came into view. The buildings were huge, built from dark stone that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Training grounds stretched for miles in every direction, filled with obstacle courses, combat arenas, and firing ranges that could accommodate species of vastly different sizes and abilities. The 17-year-old human boy was smaller than most of his fellow passengers. Where the crystalline Velthan stood nearly 8 feet tall and sparkled like living diamonds, Do-hyun barely reached 6 feet. Where the 6-armed Quintari moved with fluid grace that spoke of deadly combat training, Do-hyun walked with the quiet steps of someone trying not to draw attention. His dark hair was neatly combed, his uniform pressed and clean, and his expression was calm and polite. "First time off your homeworld, little Deathworlder?" The voice belonged to Zephyros, a young Velthan whose crystal body pulsed with soft blue light. He towered over Do-hyun, his voice carrying the musical quality common to his species, but with an edge of amusement that suggested he found something funny about the human. Do-hyun looked up at his soon-to-be roommate and nodded politely. "Yes, this is my first time leaving Earth. I am honored to be selected for the exchange program." Zephyros studied him with eyes that looked like cut sapphires. "Honored," he says. "Tell me, human, what makes your world so dangerous that it earned the Deathworld classification? You look—" He paused, searching for the right word. "Fragile." Other students had gathered around them now, curious to see Earth's first representative. There was Kylix, a proud Quintari female whose 4 main arms were already marked with the ritual scars of her warrior caste. Beside her stood Nexon, one of the telepathic Nexari whose large, dark eyes seemed to look straight through people. A group of younger students from various species clustered nearby, whispering among themselves. "I am not sure I understand the classification system," Do-hyun replied quietly. "Earth is simply my home. We have weather and animals like most worlds." This answer seemed to disappoint them. Kylix crossed 2 of her arms while the other 2 rested on the hilts of her ceremonial blades. "Weather and animals? The databases list Terra as one of the most hostile environments in known space. Your gravity is nearly twice galactic standard. Your atmosphere is corrosive to most species. Your fauna includes apex predators that hunt in coordinated packs. And your oceans," added Nexon, his mental voice carrying a note of disbelief. "Vast bodies of liquid that cover most of your planet's surface, filled with creatures larger than starships." Do-hyun blinked, considering this. "I suppose when you put it that way, Earth might seem unusual, but it is just home to me. The whales are quite gentle, actually." "Whales?" Zephyros asked. "The large ocean creatures you mentioned. Most of them eat very small fish and plants. They sing to each other across great distances. I find their songs peaceful." The alien students exchanged glances. This was not what they had expected from a Deathworlder. The stories they had heard spoke of savage warriors forged by impossible conditions, beings who could survive anything and fight with the fury of natural disasters. This polite, soft-spoken boy seemed more suited to a library than a battlefield. The ship docked with a gentle thud, and automated voices began announcing arrival procedures in dozens of languages. Students gathered their belongings and moved toward the exit ramps, chattering excitedly in their native tongues. Do-hyun collected his single small bag and followed the crowd, still drawing curious stares from his classmates. The Academy's welcome ceremony took place in the Grand Hall, a massive chamber that could hold thousands of beings. The walls were covered with banners representing every member species of the Galactic Alliance, and the ceiling was a transparent dome that showed the stars beyond. At the front of the hall, a raised platform held the Academy's senior staff. Commander Vexthal stepped forward to address the new students. She was a Quintari like Kylix, but older and bearing the scars of many battles. Her 4 arms moved in precise gestures as she spoke, a sign of high rank among her people. "Welcome, young warriors, to Vorthak Military Academy. You have been chosen from billions of candidates across the galaxy to study here. Some of you come from proud warrior traditions stretching back millennia. Others represent species new to the galactic community. All of you will be tested in ways you cannot yet imagine." Her gaze swept across the assembled students, pausing briefly on Do-hyun. "This academy does not create soldiers. Soldiers follow orders and fight battles. This academy creates leaders who prevent wars through strength, and who win them quickly when prevention fails. You will learn not just how to fight, but when to fight, why to fight, and most importantly, when not to fight. The commander gestured to the banners overhead. Each of these species has contributed something unique to our understanding of warfare. The Veltans gave us knowledge of defensive formations and the patience of stone. The Quentari taught us the value of speed and precision. The Nixari showed us how information can be more valuable than weapons. She paused again, and this time her eyes definitely focused on Do-hyun. And now we welcome our first representative from Terra. The human homeworld has been observed from afar for many cycles, but this is the first time one of their young has joined our ranks. We are curious to learn what lessons the death world of Terra might teach us. Do-hyun felt the weight of hundreds of eyes upon him. He kept his expression calm and neutral, the way his teachers back home had instructed him. Do not stand out, they had said. Be polite. Be helpful. But do not draw unnecessary attention to yourself or to Earth. The galaxy was not ready to understand humanity's true nature, and perhaps it never would be. After the ceremony, students were assigned to dormitories based on compatible environmental needs. Do-hyun found himself sharing quarters with Zephyros, whose crystalline body generated its own light and required minimal atmosphere. Their room was simple but comfortable, with adjustable gravity and climate controls. So, roommate, Zephyros said as they unpacked their belongings, what can you actually do? I have heard stories about Deathworlders, but you seem... He gestured vaguely at Do-hyun's small frame and quiet demeanor. I can do many things, Do-hyun replied mildly. I enjoy reading and I am reasonably good at mathematics. I play an instrument called a guitar, though I did not bring it with me. I know some basic first aid and I can cook simple meals. Those are not exactly warrior skills. Perhaps not, but they are useful skills. Zephyros studied his roommate with growing confusion. The databases insisted that Terra was one of the most dangerous worlds in known space, a planet that had forged its inhabitants into perfect survivors. Yet this boy seemed more like a scholar than a warrior. Either the databases were wrong or there was more to humans than met the eye. Over the following days, Do-hyun settled into academy life with quiet efficiency. He attended lectures on galactic history and military theory, taking careful notes in his neat handwriting. He participated in physical training exercises, performing adequately but not exceptionally. When other students boasted about their homeworld's military traditions, Do-hyun listened politely but rarely spoke about Earth. His instructors found him puzzling. His academic work was excellent, showing a deep understanding of strategic principles and tactical theory. But in practical exercises he seemed to deliberately limit himself, never pushing beyond what was strictly necessary. It was as if he was holding something back, though none of them could determine what. The other students gradually stopped paying attention to him. If this was the best that the famous Deathworld Terra could produce, then perhaps the stories about Deathworlders were greatly exaggerated. Do-hyun seemed content with this dismissal, continuing his studies with the same quiet dedication he had shown from the beginning. But sometimes, late at night when he thought his roommate was sleeping, Zephyros would notice Do-hyun staring out their window at the stars. His expression during these moments was different somehow, more focused and alert, and just once, Zephyros caught a glimpse of something in those dark eyes that made him remember why Deathworld species were given such careful respect in galactic politics. It was the look of a predator patiently waiting for the right moment to strike. 3 months had passed since Do-hyun arrived at Vorthok Military Academy, and he had settled into a comfortable routine that surprised no one and impressed few. Each morning he woke before his roommate, completed his exercises in silence, and prepared for classes with methodical precision. His grades were excellent, his behavior was exemplary, and his combat performance was thoroughly average. The other students had largely forgotten about Earth's first representative. In the dining hall, conversations flowed around him in a dozen different languages while he ate his meals quietly and listened. During combat training, instructors would pair him with opponents they knew he could handle, expecting neither spectacular victory nor embarrassing defeat. He delivered exactly what they expected, nothing more. Commander Vexthal reviewed his progress reports with growing disappointment. The human performed well in theoretical studies, showing impressive understanding of military history and strategic principles. But his practical applications were frustratingly mediocre. He won some fights, lost others, and showed no sign of the legendary ferocity that Deathworld species were supposed to possess. Perhaps the classification was an error, she mentioned to her aide, a young Nexari named Thexalon. The databases list Terra as extremely hostile, but this student shows none of the adaptations we would expect. Thexalon consulted his mental files, his large eyes unfocusing slightly as he accessed stored information. The atmospheric readings are accurate, Commander. High oxygen content, variable pressure systems, extreme temperature ranges. The gravity measurements are also correct. By all standards, it should be classified as a death world. Then either their species is not as hardy as the conditions suggest, or we are missing something important. Their conversation was interrupted by an announcement that would change everything. A new instructor was arriving as part of the cultural exchange program, and she was human. Li Nayan stepped off the transport ship 3 days later, and immediately every being on the landing platform understood what they had expected from Earth's first student. She stood nearly 6 feet tall with broad shoulders and moved with the confident stride of a natural warrior. Her uniform was perfectly fitted, her posture was military straight, and her eyes held the alertness of someone who had seen real combat. Unlike Do-hyun's quiet arrival, Nayan's presence commanded attention. She carried herself like a predator who knew she was at the top of the food chain, and when she spoke, her voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. I am Instructor Li Nayan, formerly of the Earth Defense Corps. I will be teaching advanced tactical planning and serving as cultural liaison for human students. Her gaze swept across the assembled faculty members, and several of them unconsciously stepped back. I look forward to working with you. Commander Vexthal felt a mix of relief and curiosity. This was what she had expected from a Deathworld warrior, but it raised new questions about young Do-hyun, who seemed so different from this impressive woman. The first meeting between the two humans took place in the academy's main courtyard. Students gathered at a respectful distance, curious to see how Earth's representatives would interact. Many expected some sort of greeting ritual or display of dominance common among warrior species. Instead, they witnessed something that confused them even more. When Do-hyun saw Instructor Lee approaching, he immediately stopped what he was doing and stood at attention. Not the casual attention stance taught at the academy, but something more formal, more respectful. When she reached him, he bowed deeply from the waist, holding the position for several seconds before straightening. Instructor Lee, he said quietly, it is an honor to serve alongside you. The honor is mine, Cadet Kang. Her voice was formal but carried an undertone of something the alien students could not identify. Respect certainly, but something deeper, something that almost sounded like deference. Zephyros whispered to Kylix, Did you see that? She is clearly the superior warrior, but she spoke to him as if he holds rank. Human hierarchy customs must be different from ours, Kylix replied, but she sounded uncertain. Over the following weeks, the alien students tried to understand the relationship between the two humans. In public, Instructor Lee treated Do-hyun exactly as she treated all students, neither better nor worse. But careful observers noticed small details that suggested a more complex dynamic. During combat exercises, she never directly corrected his technique, though she would freely adjust other students' forms. When discussing Earth's military traditions in class, she would occasionally glance at Do-hyun before choosing her words, as if checking for his approval. Most strangely, she always seemed to know where he was, even when he was supposedly out of sight. Tell us about your homeworld's approach to warfare, Commander Vexthal requested during one of Instructor Lee's lectures. Lee stood straight, her expression carefully neutral. Earth has experienced many conflicts throughout its history. We have learned that victory often belongs not to the strongest or the fastest, but to those who can adapt and endure. Surely there are specific techniques or philosophies that define human military doctrine. We believe in thorough preparation, careful planning, and the importance of understanding one's enemy. We also believe that the best victory is one achieved with minimal loss of life on all sides. These were safe, diplomatic answers that revealed little, but Nexon, with his telepathic abilities, caught fragments of deeper thoughts, images of vast armies, weapons that could destroy cities, conflicts that lasted for years and claimed millions of lives. And underneath it all, a carefully controlled fear of what humans were capable of when truly threatened. The Academy's first major crisis came when long-range sensors detected a pirate fleet attacking Kepler Colony, a small mining settlement 3 systems away. The colony's defenses were minimal, and their distress signal indicated they would not survive long without assistance. "This presents an excellent training opportunity," Commander Vexthal announced to the senior class. "You will participate in the relief operation as support personnel. Each species will contribute according to their natural strengths." The Velthans were assigned to heavy assault units, their crystal bodies nearly impervious to small arms fire. The Quintari formed fast attack squadrons, their natural agility perfect for hit-and-run tactics. The Nexari coordinated intelligence gathering and communications, their mental abilities allowing instantaneous data sharing across vast distances. Do-hyun was assigned to logistics and supply coordination, a role that seemed to match his quiet, analytical nature. No one expected much from him beyond keeping track of inventory and maintaining communication schedules. The relief fleet departed 2 days later, with Do-hyun working quietly in the command ship's logistics center. His job was to monitor supply levels, coordinate resupply drops, and ensure that combat units had everything they needed when they needed it. It was important work, but not glamorous. The battle itself was brief but intense. The pirates had superior numbers but inferior equipment and training. The Academy's forces surrounded them systematically, cutting off escape routes and forcing surrender rather than destruction. Within 6 hours, the colony was secure and the pirate fleet was in custody. During the post-mission briefing, Commander Vexthal reviewed the operation's success with satisfaction. Casualties had been minimal, objectives achieved efficiently, and the students had performed admirably under actual combat conditions. The logistics coordination was particularly effective, she noted, reviewing the data reports. Supply lines were maintained perfectly. Communication networks functioned without interruption, and resupply schedules were optimized beyond our initial projections. Several students who had worked closely with Do-hyun during the operation exchanged glances. They had begun to notice something unusual about his suggestions during the mission. Every tactical recommendation he had made, delivered so quietly it was almost overlooked, had proven devastatingly effective. When he suggested repositioning supply depots, it had inadvertently cut off the pirates' primary escape route. When he recommended adjusting communication frequencies, it had allowed them to intercept enemy transmissions. When he proposed minor changes to patrol schedules, it had resulted in perfect surveillance of all pirate movements. It was almost like he knew exactly what the pirates would do. Thexalon whispered to his squadmates. "Every change he suggested put us in exactly the right place at exactly the right time." "Impossible," Kylix replied. He had access to the same intelligence reports we did. There was no way to predict their movements so precisely. But as they reviewed the mission logs more carefully, a disturbing pattern emerged. Do-hyun's quiet recommendations had not just been tactically sound, they had been perfectly calculated to exploit weaknesses in the pirate fleet that should have been impossible to detect. It was as if he had been playing a game where he knew all the rules and could see all the pieces, while everyone else was guessing. Instructor Lee submitted her own report on the mission, but it was classified at levels far above the students' clearance. In it, she wrote a single line that would have terrified them if they had been able to read it. Cadet Kang maintained full tactical restraint throughout the operation. No instances of protocol deviation observed. The word restraint carried implications that the alien students could not understand. On Earth, military personnel underwent extensive training to control their natural instincts during combat. The most dangerous soldiers were not those who fought without limits, but those who fought with perfect control, using exactly the amount of force necessary and no more. Do-hyun had not been performing poorly in combat exercises because he lacked ability. He had been performing at precisely the level required, nothing more and nothing less, because that was what his training demanded. He was not hiding his capabilities, he was actively suppressing them. As the relief fleet returned to Kalith Prime, Do-hyun continued his quiet routine of managing supplies and maintaining equipment. He filed his reports, cleaned his workspace, and prepared for the next day's classes. To most observers, he seemed exactly the same as always. But Zephyros had begun to notice something different about his roommate. Sometimes late at night, he would catch Do-hyun staring at star charts with an intensity that seemed unusual. And once, during a particularly complex tactical simulation in class, he had seen Do-hyun's lips move silently, as if calculating possibilities that no one else had considered. The quiet human boy was becoming more mysterious rather than less, and several students were beginning to wonder if they had underestimated Earth's first representative. They had no idea how right they were. The Academy's annual war games were legendary throughout the galaxy. For 1 month, thousands of students would be divided into opposing fleets and fight massive simulated battles across multiple star systems. The scenarios were designed to test everything they had learned, from individual combat skills to large-scale strategic planning. This year's exercise pitted the United Defense Coalition against the theoretical Red Fleet. Students were randomly assigned to either side, with the Blue Fleet representing the coalition receiving newer ships, better equipment, and superior numbers. The Red Fleet was given older vessels, limited supplies, and outdated weapon systems as part of the challenge parameters. Do-hyun found himself assigned to the Red Fleet as a junior logistics officer under the command of Thraxon, a proud Velthan prince whose crystal body pulsed with aggressive red light. Thraxon viewed the exercise as an opportunity to prove Velthan's superiority in warfare, despite the disadvantages they faced. "We may have inferior equipment," Thraxon announced to his officers during the first strategy meeting, "but Velthan courage and strength will overcome any obstacle. We will crush the Blue Fleet through sheer force of will." The other Red Fleet commanders nodded with varying degrees of enthusiasm. Kylix flexed her forearms eagerly, ready for combat. Nexon remained quiet, already calculating supply requirements and communication needs. A few smaller species representatives looked nervous about their chances. Do-hyun sat in the back of the room, quietly taking notes and saying nothing. Thraxon barely acknowledged his presence, focused instead on planning glorious frontal assaults that would showcase Velthan military doctrine. For the first week of the exercise, the Red Fleet followed Thraxon's aggressive strategies. They launched direct attacks on Blue Fleet positions, attempting to overwhelm their enemies through raw determination and superior individual combat skills. The results were predictably disastrous. Their older ships were outgunned and outmaneuvered. Their limited supplies ran low after just 3 days of heavy fighting. Worse, the Blue Fleet had anticipated these straightforward tactics and prepared perfect counters for each assault. By the end of the week, the Red Fleet had lost half their vessels and controlled none of their original objectives. "This is impossible," Kylix snarled during another heated strategy session. "Their ships are too fast, their weapons too powerful. We cannot win through direct confrontation." "Velthan warriors do not retreat," Thraxon replied stubbornly. "We will find a way to break through their lines." "With what ships?" demanded Vextar, a veteran Quentari who commanded one of their few remaining squadrons. "We have lost more vessels in 1 week than most wars see in months. If we continue these frontal assaults, we will have nothing left to fight with." The argument continued for hours, with voices rising and tempers flaring. Different species blamed each other for tactical failures. Command structures began to break down as traditional rivalries surfaced under the pressure of continued defeat. Several officers openly questioned Thraxon's leadership, leading to heated exchanges that solved nothing. It was during one particularly angry confrontation between Thraxon and Vextar that Do-hyun finally spoke up. His voice was still quiet, still respectful, but there was something different in his tone. A subtle shift that made even the towering Velthans pause mid-argument and turn to look at him. "I apologize for interrupting," Do-hyun said, standing slowly from his chair in the back. "But I believe there may be alternative approaches we have not yet considered." Thraxon's crystal body flared brighter with irritation. "You are a logistics officer, human. Your job is to count supplies, not plan strategy." "Of course you are correct," Do-hyun replied with a small bow. "However, my supply reports have revealed certain patterns in Blue Fleet movements that might be relevant to our tactical situation." Despite his dismissive words, Thraxon found himself curious. "What patterns?" Do-hyun moved to the front of the room, where a large holographic display showed the current positions of both fleets. He gestured to several Blue Fleet formations with careful, precise movements. "Their supply lines are longer now than when we began," he explained. "Each victory has pushed them further from their bases. They must maintain larger patrol areas to hold captured territory. Their fast ships consume more fuel during extended operations." "This tells us nothing new," Vextar interjected. "Perhaps not," Do-hyun agreed. but it suggests vulnerabilities that we might exploit. If we were to abandon traditional engagement patterns and focus instead on disrupting their extended operations, we might turn their advantages into weaknesses. He began to outline a strategy so audacious that it bordered on madness. Instead of fighting the Blue Fleet directly, the Red Fleet would retreat deeper into the contested systems, using their knowledge of the terrain to avoid major engagements. They would strike at supply convoys, communication relays, and isolated patrol groups, always disappearing before reinforcements could arrive. "This is not warfare," Thraxon protested. "This is cowardice." "With respect," Do-hyun replied, "this is adaptation. The Blue Fleet expects us to fight according to traditional doctrines. They have prepared counters for every conventional strategy. If we change the rules of engagement entirely, their preparations become useless." The plan required precise timing and absolute cooperation between species that had been feuding for millennia. Each attack would need to be coordinated with surgical precision, striking multiple targets simultaneously to prevent effective response. Supply raids would have to be timed to maximize disruption while minimizing exposure. Most importantly, every unit would need to trust that others would play their parts perfectly. "It could work," Nexon admitted reluctantly, his telepathic abilities allowing him to model the strategy mentally. "The mathematical probabilities favor unconventional approaches when facing superior forces." Kylek studied the tactical display with growing interest. These strike patterns would require exceptional coordination. One mistimed attack could expose our entire strategy. "True," Do-hyun acknowledged. "But the alternative is continued frontal assaults against prepared positions. Those attacks have certainty of failure. This approach offers possibility of success." The way he presented the strategy was remarkable. Every detail had been thought through, every contingency planned for, every weakness in the Blue Fleet's expanded positions identified and catalogued. He spoke with quiet certainty, as if he could see the entire battlefield from above and watch both fleets move like pieces on a game board. Thraxon wanted to refuse on principle, but the logic was undeniable. They were losing badly with conventional tactics. Unconventional approaches might be their only chance. "Very well," he said finally. "We will attempt your strategy. But if it fails, the responsibility is yours." "I understand," Do-hyun replied simply. The transformation began immediately. Instead of massing for another doomed assault, Red Fleet units scattered across the contested systems, each group given specific targets and precise timing instructions. Communication protocols were changed to prevent Blue Fleet interception. Supply caches were established in hidden locations throughout the combat zone. The Blue Fleet, confident in their inevitable victory, never saw it coming. Their extended patrol lines were suddenly under attack from dozens of different directions. Supply convoys that had traveled safely for weeks found themselves ambushed in previously secure systems. Communication relays went dark across entire sectors. Each individual attack was small, but the cumulative effect was devastating. Blue Fleet commanders found themselves fighting an enemy they could not pin down, losing resources faster than they could replace them, and gradually losing control of territory they thought was secure. The masterstroke came during the exercise's third week. While Blue Fleet forces were scattered across the systems trying to protect their extended supply lines, Do-hyun coordinated a simultaneous strike on their three main command bases. The attacks were timed perfectly, hitting all targets within minutes of each other and preventing any base from warning the others. When the simulation ended, the Blue Fleet had been completely routed. Their superior numbers and equipment meant nothing when they could not bring them to bear effectively. The Red Fleet controlled most of the contested territory and had captured enough supplies to continue fighting for months if necessary. The victory was so total, so perfectly executed that Academy instructors initially suspected computer errors in the simulation. Only after extensive review did they confirm that the results were accurate. Commander Vexthal studied the tactical recordings with growing amazement. The strategy that had turned certain defeat into overwhelming victory was not just clever, it demonstrated an understanding of warfare that seemed almost supernatural. Every move the Blue Fleet made had been anticipated and countered before they even made it. "Who planned this strategy?" she asked her aide. "According to the records, it was developed collaboratively by the Red Fleet command staff," Thexlon replied. "However, witnesses report that the initial concepts came from the human logistics officer." "The quiet boy?" The one we thought was unremarkable? The same one, Commander. Vexthal replayed key moments from the tactical recordings, watching as Red Fleet units moved with perfect coordination across multiple star systems. The level of planning required was staggering. Every detail had been calculated, every contingency prepared for, every weakness exploited with ruthless efficiency. "Request his complete academic files from Earth," she ordered. "I want to know everything about this student." When Thraxon tried to claim credit for the victory during the post-exercise briefing, every student who had witnessed the strategy planning knew the truth. They had seen the quiet human boy outline a plan that none of them could have conceived, delivered with calm certainty that suggested he found such tactical problems routine. For the first time since arriving at the academy, alien students began to look at Do-Yun with something approaching unease. They had dismissed him as harmless, but this victory revealed capabilities that none of them possessed. The strategic thinking required to orchestrate such a complex operation was beyond anything they had been taught. Do-Hyun himself seemed unchanged by the experience. He filed his usual reports, cleaned his equipment, and prepared for the next day's classes with the same quiet efficiency he had always shown. When congratulated on the victory, he politely deflected credit to the team effort and suggested areas where their performance could have been improved. But late that night, Zephyros watched his roommate study star charts with new intensity. There was something different in those dark eyes now, a focused alertness that had not been there before. For just a moment, the carefully maintained mask of harmless competence had slipped, revealing something underneath that made Zephyros remember ancient warnings about Deathworld predators. The quiet human boy was no longer quite so invisible, and that change would have consequences none of them could imagine. News of the Red Fleet's impossible victory spread throughout Vorthak Military Academy like wildfire. Students who had not participated in the war games gathered around those who had, demanding details about how such a massive upset had been achieved. The tactical recordings were studied and analyzed by advanced classes, with instructors struggling to explain how conventional military doctrine had been so thoroughly defeated. But the most disturbing details were kept classified at the highest levels. Commander Vexthal and her senior staff reviewed the complete mission logs in private, and what they discovered changed their understanding of everything they thought they knew about humans. The strategy was not just effective, reported Instructor Thelvor, the Academy's chief tactical analyst. It was perfect. Every Blue Fleet movement was anticipated and countered before they even made it. The level of prediction required is beyond anything we teach here. Commander Vexthal studied the holographic replay of the final coordinated strike. Dozens of Red Fleet units moving in perfect synchronization across multiple star systems, hitting targets with surgical precision at exactly the right moment. How long would it take our best students to plan such an operation? Months, Thelvor replied immediately. The computational requirements alone would need our most advanced battle computers. But according to the logs, the human outlined this strategy in a single planning session. That is impossible. Yes, Commander, it should be. The request for Do-Hyun's complete files from Earth took 3 days to process through diplomatic channels. When the response finally arrived, Commander Vexthal read it alone in her private office, and what she found made her blood run cold. The boy's academic records were excellent but unremarkable. His psychological evaluations described him as exceptionally stable and highly empathetic. His physical assessments showed above-average fitness but nothing extraordinary. Everything seemed normal until she reached the classified medical sections. Buried deep in the restricted files was a single line that explained everything. Subject exhibits classic Type 7 tactical suppression syndrome. Recommend continued monitoring and maintenance of current conditioning protocols. Vexthal had never heard of tactical suppression syndrome, but the implications were terrifying. She immediately requested a private meeting with Instructor Lee, demanding answers about Earth's military doctrines and training methods. Lee arrived at the commander's office exactly on time, her posture military straight and her expression carefully neutral. She had been expecting this conversation since the war games ended. "Explain to me what tactical suppression syndrome means," Vexthal demanded without preamble. Lee was quiet for a long moment, choosing her words carefully. Earth learned long ago that our natural aggressive instincts make us dangerous to ourselves and others, if left unchecked. Our military personnel undergo extensive psychological conditioning to suppress combat reflexes during peacetime. Suppress what reflexes? Commander, you must understand that Earth is not like other worlds. Every day of every year our ancestors faced creatures that wanted to kill them. Predators with claws and teeth. Diseases that could wipe out entire populations. Weather that could freeze or burn or drown anything caught in it. We evolved to survive in conditions that would kill most galactic species within hours. Vexthal felt a chill run down her spine. Continue. Humans who enter military service are tested for what we call tactical instinct. Those who score highest undergo conditioning to suppress these instincts during normal operations. It allows them to function in civilized society without constantly treating everyone around them as potential threats. And Cadet Kang? Lee's expression became even more carefully controlled. Do Yun scored in the 99th percentile on all tactical assessment tests. His conditioning is among the most extensive our military has ever implemented. You mean he is hiding his abilities? No, Commander. He is fighting them. Every moment of every day, he is actively restraining instincts that millions of years of evolution have burned into his genetic code. The quiet, polite boy you see is not an act. It is a constant battle against his own nature. The implications hit Vexthal like a physical blow. The human they had all dismissed as harmless was actually in a constant state of internal warfare, suppressing reflexes that would make him a perfect killing machine. His poor performance in combat training was not due to lack of ability, but to overwhelming restraint. What would happen if this conditioning failed? Lee was quiet for so long that Vexthal wondered if she would answer at all. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. That cannot be allowed to happen, Commander. The conditioning exists for very good reasons. Word of the classified meeting somehow leaked to the student body, as secrets always did in closed communities. The details were garbled and exaggerated through multiple retellings, but the core message was clear. There was more to the quiet human than anyone had suspected. A group of young Velthan nobles led by Kyrix Threxon's ambitious cousin saw this as an opportunity. If the human boy was hiding some kind of special training or secret abilities, they would expose him and prove that Velthan warriors were superior to any Deathworld species. The humans want us to believe they are dangerous, Kyrix declared to his followers. But look at their representative. He apologizes when someone bumps into him. He loses half his combat matches. He spends his free time reading books. The war games, one of his friends pointed out. Everyone says he planned the strategy that defeated the Blue Fleet. Lucky guessing, Kyrix dismissed. Anyone can get fortunate once. True warrior skill is proven through repeated combat, not clever tricks and simulations. They began with subtle provocations, testing the boundaries of the human's patience. They would bump into Do-hyun in hallways, making it look accidental while hitting him hard enough to knock him off balance. They questioned his courage in front of other students, suggesting that humans only fought from a distance because they were too weak for close combat. They made increasingly aggressive challenges to formal duels, which Do-hyun politely declined. Through it all, Do-hyun maintained his usual calm demeanor. He apologized when they spilled food on his uniform during meals. He thanked them politely when they offered unwanted advice about his combat techniques. He continued to treat them with the same unfailing courtesy he showed everyone else. To the Velthans, this only proved that the rumors about human warriors were greatly exaggerated. A true warrior would have responded to their challenges with aggression. The fact that Do-hyun endured their harassment without retaliation meant he was weak, regardless of what classified files might claim. They decided to escalate their campaign, recruiting students from other species who were curious about human capabilities. The harassment became more organized and systematic. Equipment would mysteriously malfunction during Do-hyun's training exercises. Study materials would disappear from his room. Scheduling errors would leave him without assigned partners for group projects. Still, Do-hyun showed no signs of the legendary Deathworld fury they had heard about. He adapted to equipment failures with quiet efficiency. He recreated lost study materials from memory. He completed group projects alone when necessary, never complaining about the extra work. Perhaps humans really are not warriors at all, suggested Veltar, a Quentari who had joined Kyrix's group. Maybe their homeworld classification is based on environmental hazards rather than the inhabitants themselves. Or maybe, Kyrix replied with growing confidence, the stories about Deathworlders are just propaganda, to make weak species seem more threatening than they actually are. This theory gained support among certain students who had always resented the automatic respect given to Deathworld species. If humans could be proven weak despite their planet's classification, it would call into question the entire system that granted special status to supposedly dangerous worlds. But there were other students who had begun to notice disturbing details about Do-hyun's behavior under harassment. Zephyros watched his roommate more carefully now, and what he saw worried him. The human's sleep patterns had changed, becoming lighter and more restless. His eating habits were different, consuming food quickly and efficiently rather than savoring meals. Most unsettling, his responses to questions had become slightly delayed, as if he was carefully filtering every word before speaking. "Something is wrong," Zephyros confided to Nexon during a private conversation. "He looks the same, acts the same, but there are small changes, like he is under some kind of constant pressure." Nexon, with his telepathic abilities, had noticed the changes too. His mental patterns are becoming more structured, more controlled. "It reminds me of the meditation techniques our elders used to suppress violent thoughts." "You think he is suppressing something?" "I think he is suppressing everything. All the time. And I do not know what will happen if he stops." Instructor Lee had also noticed the changes in Do-hyun's behavior, and they filled her with growing dread. She recognized the signs from her own military training, the subtle indicators that conditioning protocols were under severe stress. The boy was maintaining control, but the effort was taking an obvious toll. She filed daily reports to Earth Command, requesting permission to intervene or withdraw Do-hyun from the program. The responses were always the same: maintain current protocols and continue observation. The diplomatic importance of the exchange program outweighed individual concerns. But Lee knew from personal experience that human conditioning had limits. Push hard enough, long enough, and even the most extensive psychological restraints could fail. When that happened, the results were usually catastrophic for everyone involved. She began making private preparations for an emergency extraction, hoping she would never need to use them, while knowing that hope was probably futile. The Velthan harassment campaign was escalating, and sooner or later they would cross a line that could not be uncrossed. The question was not whether Do-hyun's conditioning would eventually fail under sustained pressure. The question was what would happen to everyone around him when it did. In his small dormitory room, Do-hyun sat quietly at his desk, reviewing star charts for the next day's navigation class. His breathing was controlled, his posture relaxed, his expression calm. To any observer, he appeared completely normal. But deep inside his mind, ancient reflexes whispered constant suggestions about threat assessment and target elimination. Every person who had harassed him was catalogued and analyzed, their movement patterns memorized, their weaknesses identified and filed away for future reference. The conditioning held, for now, but the pressure was building, and something would eventually have to give. The harassment campaign against Do-hyun had been running for 6 weeks, when it took a darker turn. What had started as petty provocations by a small group of Velthan nobles had grown into something larger and more systematic. Students from multiple species now participated, viewing it as some kind of test to determine whether humans truly deserved their reputation as dangerous Deathworlders. Kyrix had become the unofficial leader of this movement, his natural charisma and noble status attracting followers who enjoyed the sense of purpose it gave them. In their minds, they were performing a valuable service by exposing the truth about human capabilities. If Earth's representative could be broken by simple academy politics, then clearly the stories about Deathworld warriors were exaggerated. The latest phase of their campaign involved targeting other human students who had recently arrived at the academy as part of the expanded exchange program. If they could not get a reaction from Do-hyun directly, perhaps threatening his fellow humans would finally provoke the response they were looking for. Park Ji-yeon was barely 16 years old, one of the youngest students ever accepted into the academy's preparatory program. She was small even by human standards, with bright eyes and an eager smile that made her seem even younger than her actual age. Unlike Do-hyun's quiet competence, she wore her emotions openly, clearly thrilled to be studying alongside beings from across the galaxy. She had been at the academy for only 2 weeks when Kyrix's group began their tests of courage. It started with simple challenges during combat training, pushing her harder than safety protocols recommended. When she proved surprisingly resilient, they escalated to more dangerous exercises, claiming they were helping her reach her full potential as a warrior. Human females must be tougher than they appear, Veltar observed after Jian completed an obstacle course designed for much larger species. She should have been injured several times, but she adapted to each challenge. Adaptation is not the same as strength, Kyrix replied. Let us see how she handles real pressure. They began isolating her during group exercises, forcing her to complete tasks designed for entire teams. They sabotaged her equipment during training, making dangerous situations even more hazardous. They surrounded her during meals, asking increasingly aggressive questions about human combat abilities and making veiled threats about what might happen if she could not prove herself worthy of academy training. Jian endured it all with determined cheerfulness, refusing to complain or ask for help. She seemed to view the harassment as part of normal academy hazing, something to be overcome through persistence and hard work. Her innocent trust in her fellow students' good intentions made the situation even more disturbing to those who recognized what was really happening. Dohyun noticed the changes in Jian's behavior immediately. Her bright smile became slightly forced. Her eager participation in class discussions turned more cautious. Most telling, she began eating her meals quickly and leaving the dining hall early, avoiding the extended social interactions that had initially delighted her. Are you experiencing any difficulties with your studies? He asked her one evening when they encountered each other in the library. Everything is fine, she replied quickly. But her eyes showed exhaustion that had not been there 2 weeks earlier. Some of the other students are helping me with advanced combat training. They say I need to push myself harder to keep up with galactic standards. Dohyun studied her carefully, noting the subtle signs of stress and fatigue that she was trying to hide. If you ever need assistance with anything, please do not hesitate to ask. We humans must support each other in unfamiliar environments. Thank you, but I can handle it myself, Jiyeon said with a smile that did not quite reach her eyes. I do not want anyone to think I am weak. The breaking point came during a training exercise in the Academy's deep space facility. The scenario was supposed to be a simple rescue operation, with students working in mixed teams to evacuate personnel from a damaged space station. Safety protocols were extensive, with multiple backup systems and constant instructor supervision. Kyrix and his followers had spent weeks planning their final test. They arranged for a convenient systems malfunction that would cut off communications and life support to one section of the training facility. The exercise would continue normally for most students, but Dohyun's team would face a real emergency that would finally force him to show his true capabilities. When the human realizes his fellow students are in actual danger, he will have to drop his peaceful act, Kyrix explained to his co-conspirators. We will finally see what Deathworlders are really capable of. The malfunction occurred exactly as planned. Dohyun's 6-person team found themselves trapped in a section of the facility that was rapidly losing. Word of the training facility incident spread far beyond Vorthak Military Academy, carried through diplomatic channels and military communication networks to the highest levels of galactic government. Within days, the report reached the Hegemony High Command, the ruling council of warrior races that had dominated galactic politics for over 1,000 years. The hegemony viewed itself as the natural leadership of civilized space, with membership limited to species that had proven their military superiority through conquest and expansion. They maintained their power through a careful balance of strength and intimidation, ensuring that no individual world or alliance could challenge their authority. The emergence of a potential rival terrified them more than any direct military threat. The humans have been hiding their true capabilities, declared Supreme War Marshal Korthax during an emergency session of the High Command. This boy represents a level of tactical thinking that could fundamentally alter the balance of power if it spreads to other species. One student, another council member pointed out. Surely this is not grounds for major concern. One student who defeated our finest tactical scenarios using improvised equipment and damaged systems, Korthax replied. One student whose performance exceeded anything our military academies have ever produced. If this represents typical human capability, then we are looking at an existential threat to hegemony dominance. The debate continued for hours, but the conclusion was inevitable. Humanity's representative needed to be assessed and, if necessary, eliminated before other species began to emulate human tactical methods. The mission would be disguised as a joint training exercise, providing plausible cover for what was essentially an assassination attempt. They dispatched the Crimson Legion, an elite force of 1,000 warriors drawn from the finest military units of all hegemony species. Officially, they were coming to Vorthak Academy to participate in advanced combat exercises and share tactical knowledge with the next generation of galactic military leaders. In reality, their mission was to test the human student's capabilities and eliminate him if he proved too dangerous to allow survival. Legion Commander Vorthak was a veteran of dozens of campaigns against rebellious worlds and upstart species. He had crushed military uprisings, destroyed entire fleets, and personally killed more beings than most soldiers saw in their entire careers. He arrived at Calith Prime expecting to find a talented but ultimately manageable young warrior who could be neutralized through conventional means. Instead, he discovered that the entire academy had been infected by the humans' way of thinking. During his first week of observation, Vorthak watched alien students who had been trained in traditional charge and overwhelm tactics, suddenly employing complex misdirection and psychological warfare. Instructors who had taught straightforward military doctrine for decades were adapting their lessons to include concepts like tactical restraint and strategic patience. "The contamination is worse than our intelligence suggested," he reported to High Command. "The human has not just demonstrated superior individual capability. He has fundamentally altered how other species approach the concept of warfare." The change was subtle but pervasive. Students who once competed primarily through displays of raw strength now spent hours analyzing their opponent's weaknesses before engaging. Combat exercises that had traditionally been won through overwhelming force were being decided by clever positioning and careful timing. Most disturbing of all, they were getting better results. Academy performance metrics showed dramatic improvements across all species. Since the humans' arrival, win rates in simulated battles had increased by 30%. Casualty rates during training exercises had dropped to near zero. Students were solving tactical problems that had stumped previous generations. If other military academies adopted these methods, if entire species began training their warriors to think like humans, the hegemony's traditional advantages would become meaningless. Superior numbers and advanced technology meant nothing against opponents who could turn any situation to their advantage through pure tactical brilliance. Vorthak realized they were facing a threat unlike anything in their military experience. This was not a conventional enemy that could be defeated through superior firepower. This was an idea, a way of thinking about conflict that was spreading like a virus through the galactic military community. The only solution was to eliminate the source before the infection became irreversible. The Legion staged what appeared to be a routine joint training exercise, but with lethal intent hidden beneath diplomatic protocol. The scenario was carefully designed to force Do-hyun into an impossible situation where he would have to choose between revealing his full capabilities or watching his fellow students die. "We will create a crisis that requires immediate response," Vorthak explained to his senior officers. "Multiple simultaneous emergencies that cannot be solved through conventional methods. The human will be forced to demonstrate whatever hidden abilities his species possesses, giving us the intelligence we need to counter them." The exercise began at dawn, with Academy students assigned to various roles in a complex multi-system scenario. Pirates had supposedly attacked a diplomatic convoy, taking hostages and threatening to execute them unless their demands were met. Rescue operations would need to be planned and executed under extreme time pressure. What the students did not know was that the Crimson Legion had modified every aspect of the simulation. Safety protocols had been disabled. Emergency systems had been sabotaged. The scenario was designed not to test their abilities but to push them beyond their limits until someone broke. Do-hyun was assigned to a coordination role, managing communications between rescue teams and providing tactical support for the operation. It seemed like another routine exercise until the first malfunction occurred. The transport carrying the primary rescue team suffered a critical systems failure, leaving them stranded in hostile territory with no communication and rapidly failing life support. Simultaneously, the command ship lost navigation control and began drifting toward a simulated gravity well that would destroy them within minutes. "Multiple crisis situations," Vorthak observed with satisfaction. "Let us see how the famous human tactical thinking handles truly impossible odds." But Do-hyun did not react the way they expected. Instead of panicking or rushing to implement desperate solutions, he became very still and very quiet. His breathing slowed to an almost meditative rhythm. His eyes swept across the tactical displays with mechanical precision, processing information at speeds that seemed superhuman. "Requesting immediate reclassification of exercise parameters," he said calmly into his communication unit. "Current scenario exceeds safety protocols by unacceptable margins." "Request denied," came the reply from Legion controllers. "All participants must adapt to changing conditions." Do-hyun studied the displays for another moment, then reached a conclusion that chilled everyone who heard it. "Understood. Implementing alternative protocols." What followed was not a rescue operation. It was a systematic dismantling of everything the Crimson Legion thought they understood about warfare. Do-hyun did not try to solve the problems they had created. Instead, he rejected their fundamental assumptions about what the problems were. Rather than racing to save the stranded rescue team, he convinced them to sabotage their own equipment in ways that would make their position appear hopeless, while actually providing perfect cover for extraction. Instead of trying to restore navigation to the drifting command ship, he calculated its trajectory and turned the apparent disaster into a perfect attack vector against the simulated pirate base. Most unsettling of all, he began coordinating responses to crises that had not yet occurred. Legion observers watched in growing horror as he deployed resources to counter threats that were still in the planning stages, as if he could read their intentions before they acted on them. "How is he predicting our moves?" one Legion officer whispered to his commander. "He is not predicting them," Vorthak replied with dawning understanding. "He is controlling them." The realization hit like a physical blow. The human was not responding to their scenario, he was orchestrating it. Every crisis they created, every impossible situation they engineered was being turned into an advantage through tactical brilliance that bordered on the supernatural. Within 2 hours, the entire exercise had been transformed from a test of human capabilities into a demonstration of Legion inadequacy. Their elite warriors found themselves outmaneuvered by Academy students following strategies so complex that they could barely comprehend them, let alone counter them. The breaking point came when Do-hyun began addressing the Legion directly, his quiet voice carrying across all communication channels with impossible authority. "Crimson Legion forces, you are currently positioned in Tactical Formation Theta 7, with heavy assault units concentrated in sectors 4 through 8. Your supply lines are overextended and vulnerable to interdiction at 17 specific points. Your command structure relies on centralized decision-making that creates predictable delays in response timing." Vorthak felt ice form in his veins. The human was describing their deployment with perfect accuracy, including classified details, YC. That should have been impossible for him to know. "Your mission parameters include elimination of perceived threats to hegemony dominance." Do-hyun continued with the same calm precision. "Standard protocol would involve escalating the exercise until target subjects suffer fatal accidents that can be attributed to training mishaps." The communication channels erupted in shocked voices as Legion officers realized their supposedly secret mission had been completely compromised from the beginning. "However," Do-hyun said, and something in his tone made everyone fall silent, "I would like to propose an alternative approach." What happened next would be studied by military historians for centuries. Without firing a shot, without issuing a single threat, Do-hyun systematically demonstrated to 1,000 elite warriors exactly why human tactical thinking was so dangerous. He did not defeat them through superior force or advanced technology. He simply showed them step by step how every move they could possibly make had already been anticipated and countered. Every strategy they might attempt had fatal flaws that he could exploit. Every advantage they thought they possessed was actually a weakness waiting to be turned against them. One by one, entire companies of the hegemony's finest warriors began laying down their weapons. Not in surrender, but in recognition. They had finally understood what they were truly facing. And they realized that resistance was not just futile, but meaningless. The human had not just outfought them, he had outthought them so completely that they could no longer conceive of victory under any circumstances. It was like playing a strategy game against an opponent who could see the entire board while they were limited to a single square. By the end of the exercise, Vorthak stood alone in the command center, staring at tactical displays that showed his entire legion rendered effectively powerless by a 17-year-old boy who had never raised his voice above a polite conversational tone. Why? He asked finally, his voice carrying the exhaustion of absolute defeat. Do-hyun appeared on the main communication screen, still sitting calmly at his coordination station. Because war is not about who can inflict the most damage, Commander. It is about achieving objectives with minimal cost to all parties involved. Your objective was to assess human military capabilities. Mission accomplished. And our secondary objective? The elimination of perceived threats to galactic stability? That objective was based on flawed assumptions. Humans do not seek to replace the hegemony's authority. We seek to ensure that authority is exercised wisely. The implications were staggering. The humans were not trying to conquer the galaxy. They were trying to improve it. And they had capabilities that made traditional military resistance impossible. Vorthak realized with crystal clarity that the balance of power in the galaxy had already shifted. It had shifted the moment the first human student arrived at Vorthak Academy and began quietly demonstrating that there were better ways to think about conflict. The question was no longer whether humanity would change galactic civilization. The question was whether that change would be peaceful or catastrophic. In the silence that followed, Do-hyun began filing his routine after-action report, treating the complete neutralization of the galaxy's most elite military force as just another training exercise that had concluded successfully. Suggest revised diplomatic protocols for future interspecies military cooperation, he wrote with typical understated precision. Current methods appear to create unnecessary tensions. Also request permission to organize study groups for interested students in advanced tactical theory. Academy curriculum shows room for improvement in developing comprehensive strategic thinking. As news of the incident spread throughout the galaxy, one truth became undeniably clear. Humanity had revealed why Deathworld species were given such careful respect in galactic politics. Not because they were savage or uncontrollable, but because they were so much more dangerous when they were not. The quiet boy who had seemed so harmless had reminded the galaxy that the most dangerous predator was always the one you never saw coming. And Kang Do-hyun? He returned to his studies, continued treating everyone with unfailing courtesy, and quietly began organizing that study group he had mentioned in his report. After all, there was always room for improvement in tactical education. The galaxy watched and learned to be very careful around humans who smiled politely and spoke softly. Because now they knew what lay beneath that carefully maintained surface, and they understood that their survival depended on never forcing those restraints to break completely. The age of human influence had begun, not with conquest or domination, but with the simple recognition that some battles were won before they ever started. And the most important victory was convincing your opponents that fighting was unnecessary in the first place. 6 months after the Crimson Legion incident, Vorthak Military Academy had become the most sought-after educational institution in the galaxy. Applications flooded in from every member species of the Galactic Alliance, with young beings desperate to learn the tactical methods that had so completely neutralized the hegemony's finest warriors. The study group that Do-hyun had quietly suggested in his after-action report had grown into a full academic program. What started as informal discussions about strategic thinking had evolved into mandatory coursework that fundamentally changed how the galaxy approached military education. Commander Vexthal stood in her office, reviewing enrollment statistics that would have seemed impossible just a year earlier. Species that had been bitter enemies for centuries were now sending their brightest students to study together. Traditional rivals were collaborating on joint tactical exercises. The entire structure of galactic military relationships was transforming. The Hegemony Council has formally requested admission to the program, reported her aide Thexalon, his mental voice carrying notes of amazement. They wish to send 200 of their most promising officers for advanced training. The same council that sent the Crimson Legion to eliminate our human student. The very same, Commander. Their formal statement describes the request as essential for maintaining galactic security and promoting interspecies cooperation. Vexthal studied the application documents with mixed feelings. The transformation had been remarkable to witness, but she still remembered the terror of watching 1,000 elite warriors rendered helpless by a 17-year-old boy who never raised his voice. The implications of that demonstration continued to ripple through galactic politics in ways no one had fully anticipated. The humans had kept their promise about peaceful change. No invasion fleets had appeared in Earth's outer system. No ultimatums had been delivered to galactic governments. Instead, Earth had simply begun sharing their educational methods with anyone who requested them, transforming potential enemies into eager students. But the change was no less profound for being voluntary. Species that had relied on brute force for millennia were discovering the advantages of tactical subtlety. Governments that had maintained power through intimidation were learning to achieve better results through careful negotiation. Military commanders who had built careers on overwhelming their opponents were finding more elegant solutions to strategic problems. The Academy's training programs had expanded to accommodate the flood of new students, with humans arriving as instructors and cultural liaisons. They were all like Instructor Lee, confident and capable warriors who carried themselves with unmistakable authority. But they all treated Do-hyun with the same subtle deference that had puzzled alien observers from the beginning. "Status report on Cadet Kang," Vexthal requested. "Continuing his studies with typical performance metrics," Thexalon replied. "Academic scores remain excellent. Combat training results show consistent competence without exceptional achievements. Psychological evaluations indicate stable conditioning with no signs of deterioration." "And his study group activities?" "Attendance has stabilized at approximately 300 students from 47 different species. Topics covered include strategic patience, tactical misdirection, resource optimization, and what they term comprehensive threat assessment. Student feedback remains overwhelmingly positive." Vexthal nodded, though she remained concerned about aspects of the program that even she was not cleared to fully understand. The humans had been remarkably open about sharing their tactical knowledge, but certain elements of their training remained classified at levels that suggested galactic governments were still learning uncomfortable truths about Earth's capabilities. The most recent revelation had come through diplomatic channels just 2 weeks earlier. Earth's military command had finally revealed the true scope of their conditioning programs, and the numbers were staggering. Nearly 70% of Earth's adult population had undergone some form of tactical suppression training. The quiet, polite humans that other species encountered in diplomatic settings were not exceptional individuals. They were representative samples of an entire civilization that had learned to restrain instincts that could reshape galactic civilization. "Permission to speak freely, Commander?" Thexlon asked, his mental voice carrying unusual uncertainty. "Granted. I have been analyzing the long-term implications of current trends, and the projections are significant. If human tactical methods continue spreading at current rates, traditional military doctrines will become obsolete within 2 generations. Species that fail to adapt will find themselves unable to compete in any meaningful way. You believe we are witnessing the end of conventional warfare? I believe we are witnessing evolution in action, Commander. The humans have demonstrated survival strategies that are simply superior to anything else in the galaxy. Other species will either learn to emulate them or become irrelevant." The assessment was sobering but probably accurate. The Crimson Legion incident had proven that raw military power was meaningless against opponents who could predict and counter every possible move. Traditional concepts of strength and weakness were being redefined in ways that favored intelligence over aggression, patience over speed, and comprehensive planning over overwhelming force. Down in the Academy's main training facility, Do-hyun was conducting one of his regular tactical seminars. The classroom was packed beyond capacity, with students from dozens of species hanging on every word of his quiet lectures. Today's topic was resource optimization during extended operations, a subject that seemed mundane until he began revealing the complex interconnections that could turn minor efficiency improvements into decisive strategic advantages. "Consider the standard supply convoy," he said, gesturing to a holographic display that showed ships moving between star systems. "Traditional doctrine focuses on protecting the cargo from external threats, but comprehensive analysis reveals 14 different ways that convoy operations can be optimized to provide additional tactical benefits beyond simple resource delivery." He began highlighting various aspects of the convoy's route, timing, and composition, showing how each element could serve multiple purposes simultaneously. Supply ships could gather intelligence while delivering materials. Transport schedules could be coordinated to create patrol patterns that provided surveillance coverage. Cargo manifests could be designed to mislead potential enemies about actual strategic priorities. "The key principle is that every action should serve multiple objectives," Do-hyun continued. "Waste occurs when resources are dedicated to single purposes. Efficiency improves when the same resources accomplish several goals simultaneously. Zephyros, now in his final year at the academy, watched his former roommate with a mixture of admiration and lingering unease. The crystalline Velthan had learned more about tactical thinking in the past year than in all his previous education combined, but he had also gained a deeper understanding of what the humans were really teaching them. It was not just military strategy. It was a completely different way of thinking about problems, relationships, and goals. The humans approached every situation with a level of comprehensive analysis that bordered on the supernatural, seeing connections and possibilities that other species missed entirely. Question, called out Veltar, the Quintari student who had once participated in the harassment campaign against Do-hyun. His attitude had changed dramatically after witnessing the demonstration against the Crimson Legion. How do you identify which objectives should take priority when multiple goals conflict with each other? Do-hyun considered the question carefully, as he always did. Prioritization requires understanding the long-term consequences of each choice. Short-term tactical gains that compromise strategic position are generally inefficient. Immediate objectives that interfere with fundamental goals should be reconsidered or approached differently. But how can anyone calculate all possible long-term consequences? The variables are infinite. True complete calculation is impossible, Do-hyun acknowledged. But comprehensive analysis can identify the most probable outcomes and plan for the most significant contingencies. The goal is not perfect prediction, but informed decision-making based on the best available information. The discussion continued for another hour, with students asking increasingly sophisticated questions about tactical theory and strategic planning. Do-hyun answered each query with the same patient thoroughness, never seeming annoyed by repetitive questions or frustrated by concepts that took multiple explanations to clarify. But observers who knew what to look for could still see the signs of internal struggle, the slight pauses before responding to certain questions, the careful word choices when discussing specific tactical applications, the way his eyes would sometimes focus on nothing, while he processed thoughts that required conscious filtering before being shared. The conditioning was holding, but it remained an active process that required constant mental effort. Do-hyun was not naturally calm and patient. He was choosing to be calm and patient every moment of every day. The quiet, polite teacher his students admired was the result of ongoing internal warfare between human instincts and human discipline. After the seminar ended and students dispersed to their next classes, Do-hyun remained in the empty classroom, updating his lesson plans and reviewing student performance metrics. He worked with the same methodical precision he brought to everything, making notes about which concepts needed additional explanation and which students required individual attention. Instructor Lee found him there an hour later, still grading assignments with meticulous care. The Hegemony Council has requested a formal meeting, she reported without preamble. They want to discuss what they term comprehensive strategic cooperation between Earth and the major galactic powers. Do-hyun looked up from his papers, his expression carefully neutral. What are Earth Command's instructions regarding such discussions? Continue current educational programs. Maintain diplomatic cooperation. Avoid any actions that could be interpreted as attempts to establish political dominance. She paused, studying his face for signs of stress or fatigue. How are you managing the increased attention? Within acceptable parameters, he replied. The conditioning protocols remain stable, and the educational mission continues to produce positive results. And personally? For just a moment something flickered behind his dark eyes, a hint of the pressure he carried, the constant effort required to maintain the careful balance between human instincts and human restraint. Then it was gone, replaced by the same calm competence he always displayed. I am honored to serve as a representative of Earth and humanity, he said quietly. The opportunity to share knowledge with so many different species is professionally rewarding and personally meaningful. It was a diplomatic non-answer, but Lee understood the message beneath the words. He was managing, but the cost was significant. The boy who had arrived at the academy 18 months earlier, as an unknown exchange student, was now the focal point of galactic transformation, and that responsibility weighed heavily despite his apparent calm. Earth is proud of your service, she said formally. Your contributions to interspecies understanding have exceeded all expectations. After she left, Do-hyun returned to his grading with the same steady focus he brought to all his tasks. But outside the classroom windows, he could see ships arriving and departing from the Academy's landing platforms with increasing frequency. Delegations from across the galaxy were coming to study human tactical methods, to understand how such devastating effectiveness could be achieved through such quiet means. The galaxy was changing, and he was the catalyst for that change, not through conquest or domination, but through the simple demonstration that there were better ways to think about conflict, cooperation, and survival. It was exactly what Earth had hoped to achieve when they sent their first representative to Vorthik Military Academy. The quiet boy who had seemed so harmless had indeed proven to be the most dangerous kind of weapon, an idea whose time had come. The age of human influence was no longer beginning. It had arrived, and the galaxy would never be the same. But for Do-hyun, it was just another day of teaching students who wanted to learn how to think more clearly, plan more carefully, and achieve their goals more efficiently. After all, there was always room for improvement in tactical education. And the most important lesson was that the greatest victories were won not through superior force, but through superior understanding of what victory actually meant.